Welcome to the Armchair Constituents, the weekly podcast about news topics. While we're not experts or academics, we do like to speak our voice freely. And keep in mind that as the facts change, so can our opinions.
We are now about to present the main attraction of our world-famous show.
All right, take two. Welcome to the Armchair Constituents, episode 6. It is officially a month. We've tried to record this twice now, so hopefully it works.
Hey, we
Kramer?
made it.
Yeah, there you go. Let's say it again. All right, updates. Emmanuel Macron is sworn in as the president of France. The 39-year-old investment banker takes over for Francois Hollande, promising to reform and relaunch the EU and restore France's confidence to believe in themselves. So yeah, there's that, but yeah, it's just a collective sigh that Marine Le Pen is not the president of France, and we dodged a bullet for now.
And then we'll all collectively take a giant in when parliamentary elections come up in the next couple months. And I look forward to continuing conspiracy theories about his connections with the Rothschilds. It'll be great.
What about the conspiracy theories that he's a homosexual?
Wow,
These are hard-hitting things that need to be discussed.
These are true facts.
Russia Today is news. UK election news. You want to talk about this since apparently you fucked it up last week.
Okay, well, we're learning as our intro says. You know, sometimes opinions change with facts. Yeah, so when we talked about this last week, we had speculated a little bit about what it would look like between Labor and the Conservative Party, and I was basing everything I had opinions on off of U.S. trends, which during elections like this, generally the party in power loses some seats. Apparently, that is definitely not the case, and I was what some people would call wrong. Yeah, so it looks like Labor is going to get its ass handed to it for numerous reasons. We'll just start with the first one. Jeremy Corbyn is massively unpopular. I heard someone on NPR who covers British politics say that right now, if the United States is House of Cards, then the UK is Veep. Labour had their manifesto leaked, and Jeremy Corbyn wants to nationalize the energy industry, do a bunch of stuff like that, which apparently no one really likes the idea of. But aside from Jeremy Corbyn's personal unpopularity and how preachy he is about the virtues of salad and how smoking is bad, that really doesn't do much for the youth vote. They've had some problems with membership and where their members are going. Apparently, a lot of the people that voted with the UK Independence Party, UKIP, the folks that pushed for Brexit, were Labour voters, which sort of underlines one of the points we've been talking about how a lot of these right-wing populist movements utilize a voter base from the left. So a lot of these Labour voters ended up voting UKIP, and now that UKIP is basically defunct and useless, thanks Boris Johnson, a lot of those folks are going over to the Conservative Party at the same time that a bunch of others are going to the Scottish National Party with Nicola Sturgeon. So it doesn't look like it's going to be very good for Labour. They had some council elections earlier. I think it was earlier this month, later last month, and the Conservatives took a lot of seats. But apparently all this is Theresa May's effort to solidify support in Parliament as she goes into negotiations with the EU, specifically with Guy Verhofstadt. Because there's a split in the Conservative Party right now between the folks that want to rip that Band-Aid off and just go ahead and leave the EU versus the folks that want to negotiate, maybe try to finagle some economic benefit a la Norway, like we had talked about, with maybe access entirely or partial to the EU market. So she's refused to engage in any type of debate. She's only had these tightly controlled campaign events, whereas Jeremy Corbyn seems to be flopping around like a fish, trying to look like a presentable candidate. So looks to be pretty interesting going into it. I mean, it's June 8th. We got a little bit less than a month, but I guess we could say it's not so much of an update as it is a correction.
Yeah, the same thing. Updates, corrections. So last night, this morning, North Korea had another missile test. It
You remember when that statement used to be alarming?
Yeah. well, this one got off the ground. This is the difference. This one made it about 30 minutes off the east coast of North Korea into the ocean near Russia's Vladivostok region. Say the real word for me.
Vladivostok.
Yeah, that one. I'm not gonna cuss you this time.
I don't know.
But yeah, so U.S. intelligence suggests that the missile wasn't intercontinental ballistic. Experts seem to beg to differ that this missile they launched at a high trajectory, and if it was fired at a more standard one, it would have had a range of about 2,500 miles. Typical ICBM has about 3,700 mile range, so they're getting there, which doesn't bode well. But most importantly, it's just the tensions that are. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't actually have a legitimate point, just kind of a mildly humorous one.
Oh, okay.
They really need to rename that instead of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Intercontinental, to me, implies it's going from continent to continent. So if you're on the border of Asia and Europe and you launch it 5 feet, to me that counts as intercontinental. But I think I need to speak with someone at the missile agency and have them rename that.
All right, well, you do that. I'm going to get back to my last point about how this is doing nothing but ratcheting up the tensions. But the White House put out a press release saying that, and I quote, "They can't imagine Russia will be pleased with this." I don't know why that matters, but something about North Korea being a menace and countries need to unify for stricter sanctions. But
it's funny because I thought their whole line of argument was, sanctions haven't worked, and now they're calling that. But I mean, it's not unlike the White House to release 5 contradictory statements on the same topic within a fairly limited time span. But
the podcast seems to still be recording, so we can move on to the next topic. One we haven't talked about yet, libel laws. So we spoke on this last week. Or you did. I didn't really speak much on it. But so a West Virginia journalist by the name of Dan Heyman was arrested for questioning Secretary of Health and Human Services, I believe, Tom Price, about basically asking about some of the new pre-existing conditions that they've added, most specifically domestic abuse. He was arrested for breaching Secret Service and a willful disruption of state government processes. But Tom Price and Kellyanne Conway were in West Virginia to listen to. They were having some kind of summit on the opioid crisis in West Virginia.
Yeah.
So they were there talking about that. Apparently, he was not to be questioned.
Yeah, well, you have to spread the word of the Lord if you want to combat the opioid crisis.
Hey, save it for later, damn it.
Yeah. He was questioning him. How do you rationalize domestic abuse being a pre-existing condition? You aren't particularly born with it. It's kind of put upon you. And in an interview that he did with the Washington Post after the fact, it was revealed that he was released on a $5,000 bail. And he said, basically, I was the criminal complaint that the security team did for his arrest, it basically boiled down to he was talking too loud. And he was like, I've been a journalist for 30 years and I've never been arrested in my life. I know what I'm doing. I've been published all over the place. And I was arrested for talking too loud because I'm asking Secretary of Health and Human Services Tom Price how in the world you can rationalize domestic abuse being a pre-existing condition. So
from what I read, he wasn't even asking that. He was trying to get Tom Price to confirm that domestic abuse was a pre-existing condition. That's what I read. Now you could say either way, and it's not really important.
Yeah,
it was just he wasn't even asking him why, which I would argue is the harder question to answer. He was just asking if he could confirm if it was actually a pre-existing condition.
Just give me a yes or a no.
Yeah. So. But and our last update is on Venezuela again, which is still what's the word I'm looking for? In turmoil. There are riots everywhere. Getting no better. But now you wanted to touch more on a refugee situation where people are fleeing the country for Colombia.
Yeah. As you and I talked about before we started recording, I mean, Colombia has had issues with folks fleeing from Venezuela in the past, but right now there are people flooding from Venezuela into Colombia. A lot of it has to do with access to health care. Venezuelan hospitals are so ill supplied that they cannot get health care, and a lot of political leaders in Colombia are talking about instituting an ID or a visa system. Apparently, it's been alluded to borders in certain places in Latin America being somewhat like the EU. You can kind of just come in and out. But they've got so many people coming in for healthcare that it's overwhelming Colombian hospitals. There's along the border, and it's causing some problems, especially with the fallout of the FARC, the narco-political paramilitary group that laid down arms later last year. With the collapse of them, there's a lot of different small gangs and criminal organizations vying for power. This, in conjunction with a lot of people coming in, it looks like it's going to be a kind of a tense situation. Periodically, Venezuela under Maduro had shut down borders with Colombia, preventing the flow of supplies and people and material and things like that. So they just have to something to keep your eye on. Another point that I forgot: Colombia has banned Venezuelan kids from their schools at all. So if they do have a legitimate refugee crisis, I mean, you can easily see a lot of animosity boiling over the way that you have with the refugee crisis with Syria. I mean, a group of people fleeing from an unpleasant situation, not being welcome, and probably a big uptick in crime.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, that's definitely possible. When you have that many people fleeing and they're fleeing into a better situation, but it's not necessarily easy. Yeah, you're going to have an uptick in crime, even if it's just issues with other people, not necessarily like theft, just disputes. But we'll keep tabs on that like we have every week for the last month.
Oh, do we want to hit on Turkey before we move on to the topics?
Oh, did we not hit on Turkey this time? No, we didn't.
No, not this go around.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. We'll hit on it now. So, the U.S. is arming the YPG, which is considered by the Turks
YPG.
to be... Right? Oh, did I say it wrong?
No, you were right. I was just confirming YPGs.
Okay, yeah. So by the Turks, these people have connections to the PKK, which is, they're basically, the Turks consider both organizations terrorist organizations. This is causing a whole uproar that you're now going to explain way better than I could.
Yeah, so we talked about it a little bit last week, I think. And the YPGs are these groups of predominantly ethnic Kurds living in Syria. And it stands for People's Protection Units, whatever that translates to with their acronym in Kurdish or Turkish. And these People's Protections Units do have ties, that even the U.S. acknowledges, to the PKK, which is the Kurdistan Workers' Party. Now, Turkey considers the Kurdistan Workers' Party a terrorist organization. So does the United States. Turkey also considers the YPGs to be a terrorist organization. The U.S. doesn't. And we just gave or sold them a bunch of guns, and the Turks are pretty mad about it. The defense minister, Cavusoglu, said that the weapons that we give to the YPGs have ended up into the hands of the PKK in the past, which I don't know the accuracy of that statement, but if it is the case, it would sort of emphasize and highlight that they do have connections, and it is a somewhat reasonable point. But Cavusoglu and the Turkish government says they want us to stop supporting these People's Protections Units, which were integral in the freeing or the liberating of the city of Manbij. They want the U.S. to back Turkish-trained Syrian rebels, but that brings up a lot of questions about, are these rebels reliable? How well have they been trained? I mean, trustworthiness. Turkey's been acting incredibly strange recently, and On top of that, Erdogan is due to meet Trump in D.C. later this week, and he had come last year. I think it was after the coup attempt. But I mean, it should be interesting. I mean, I know Trump's taken a lot of flack for Duterte and Sisi and Erdogan, so it will be an interesting meeting. I look forward to all the weird photos and quotes that come out of it.
Yeah, or the tweets. That'd be the best thing. But I mean, maybe the recording will leak, and then we can just hear the whole meeting firsthand. So let's
B5. Oh, he sunk my battleship. Good job, Erdogan.
God damn it. He's just in there playing Hasbro games with fucking world leaders.
You got me diagonal. Playing Connect 4 with Donald Trump.
So let's move into the main topics of the show. The first one we have is maybe not necessarily a new topic, but it's something that's coming up here shortly, this week actually. It's the looming foreclosures in Flint, Michigan. So essentially, what's going on? The city has sent out like a little over 8,000 letters to residents to collect 5.8 million in unpaid water bills. That it's for the past 2 years of general bills. They generally, from what I've read, they send every 6 months. If you're every year. If you're more than 6 months behind on bills, they send it to you. They didn't do it last year. They sent it this year. There's some people with upwards of $1,000 worth of unpaid water bills to a city that is still pumping lead-filled water into their homes. But now the city has said if that these residents have until May 19th, which is next Friday, to pay the unpaid bills, or it'll be transferred to tax bills, which can lead to foreclosure on their homes. Which it's I don't know. This is just a very rough situation. I mean, they're talking about 8,000 people, 8,000 families being removed from their homes for not paying for water that was undrinkable up until a couple months ago. And really, the city of Flint still hasn't officially said the water is drinkable. It's been said by federal regulations it's potable. I'll use a actual word instead of just saying drinkable again. But yeah. So
this is the definition of Kafkaesque. We're going to give you water that will kill you. By the way, please pay us for the water that will kill you, that you haven't paid us for yet.
Since we have the website kind of set up now, I want to try to write on this. But I mean, U.S. Congress passed legislation giving them $100 million to go in and replace the lead pipes, which, I mean, they're really the only city doing this right now. They said it'll take about till 2020 to replace, which, I mean, could essentially make Flint go from having, they don't even have the most contaminated water in the country. They're just the most publicized, and by most publicized, I mean that means very little, because they're really not.
Yeah, still very ignored. Yeah, it quit being 2014, and we quit caring. Yeah, apparently the funds for the near $100 million that they got was from the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act of 2016 that Obama helped pass, that now Trump is trying to take credit for, that he did this whole thing the whole time.
Listen, I don't give a shit who gives credit. Let's just make it so federal regulations don't allow cities and counties to pump lead-filled water into your homes. That's absolutely absurd, and it's happening.
Yeah,
and more than likely, you have lead-filled water in your home. That's just. If you look at the stats, that's just kind of how it's looking right now.
Yeah. So I mean, I didn't know a lot about Flint. I just like everyone else that didn't know anything about it, had strong opinions on it. But I looked into it, and I'm just looking at sort of the catalyst point of it, and it's actually pretty interesting. Michigan's mayor, Rick Snyder, was trying to
governor?
save a bunch of money. Yeah,
Was the
I didn't say
governor
that. Yeah, sorry.
or the mayor of Flint?
The governor. Yeah, the Republican governor Rick Schneider was trying to figure out a way to save money because it's Michigan. You don't have a lot of it. And they had this contract with the Detroit Water and Sewage Department, DWSD, and they wanted to switch to the Carignan Water Authority, KWA, because in theory it would be cheaper. And he also wanted to do a little bit of stimulus by having them construct this, the water filtration system to create some jobs behind it. That was the rationale. But apparently the DWSD, the Detroit Water and Sewage Department, offered Schneider basically a 50% cut in costs that would have saved them $800 million over 20 years, which is way more money than they would have saved if they went with the Carignan Water Authority, the KWA version of it, but they just elected not to take it. And they didn't have the water filtration system set up for the new ones. They're like, let's just pump water in from Flint, from this river, and use an old antiquated filtration system. Again, I feel like Kafkaesque is almost the only way to describe it.
Yeah, I mean that's the gist of it. I want to research this more because from what I've seen, it looks like, I mean, this is the most publicized, but this is nowhere near how bad it actually is in some cities and counties in this country. So
yeah, I mean, I know that where I'm from in rural central Virginia, I mean, you get iron, you get lead in your water. It's not uncommon. I mean, nobody is on any type of town water. We stick with wells, just because.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why I said federal regulations allow lead contaminated water. It's just a certain level, but
it's good for you. Keeps your bones strong.
Yeah, and causes stillbirth and brain defects.
Look, I'm a guy. I don't have kids. So.
Okay. I'm not gonna explain biology right now. Let's go into another story about right-wing populism. This time in Poland. I don't know much about this. This seems to be your thing, so I'm gonna let you take the lead, like I do most times.
So we've been talking a lot about right-wing populism as a whole and all the different flavors and varieties that's going across Europe and a little bit in the United States. And Poland was in the news for some of the things they've been going through. And basically, Poland seems to be going towards this Hungarian-style, Viktor Orban-esque illiberal democracy. And Viktor Orban in Hungary has come out and said, "Oh yeah, we're an illiberal democracy. We don't want transparency. We don't want, accountability." It's like, you can vote, but it doesn't really matter. He's actually very blatant about this. But Poland is kind of going through this own little sad renaissance. As some background. Poland is very religious. They are a very, very Catholic country. They are very homogenous with regards to culture. 98% of the country is ethnically Polish, and they have a history of being very anti-communist and very anti-Semitic. The adage that was attributed to Poland for a long time was anti-Semitism without Jews, because 98% of the population was ethnically Polish. They had virtually no Jewish population, but they were ribaldly anti-Semitic. And this is now switched over with Islam. They call it Islamophobia without Muslims. There's 20 to 40,000 max Muslims in Poland, and they are just as ribaldly. We have to get the Muslims out. They're tearing the country apart. We're losing what it means to be Polish, and they're utilizing this line of arguments that you've heard from Geert Wilders, that you've heard from Marine Le Pen, you heard it from UKIP, and a lot of the right-wing populists that we're defending Western culture. And I mean, Western culture to me today means basically the same thing that states' rights does. The term states' rights has been so corrupted by people that want to have blatantly racist policies. When people say we're defending Western culture, really, you just don't like immigrants. That's what it is. You want to keep your particular culture, and you don't want people to do things that you don't know what those things are. But again, you've got this classic example of scapegoating all of their problems onto immigrants. One of the other things or one of the other issues that Poland has is that they have, again, the right-wing populists against the neoliberal order. You can have people in Poland living on only €300 a month. And after communism fell, which sort of explains their anti-communism as a whole, you're supposed to have this new neoliberal order and everything is going to go really well, but it doesn't, particularly for Poland. They have incredibly high wealth disparity. So they're seeing, these more free market-esque policies coming around that aren't benefiting them. They're still poor. So they see this integration into the European markets as undermining Poland. If you're poor, they're clinging to their culture and the history that's associated with that. They see the integration of these markets as just undermining what it means to be Polish. And actually, the Polish government pays people to have kids. It's not much. It's like, I think it's like maybe over €100. But they pay them to have children. Apparently their birth rate's very low, and they're trying to reestablish some dominance in that region. But
now
go ahead.
They pay them like €100, like you have the kid, and part of it is you just get this check, or is it like the U.S. does, like tax breaks for children?
No, they literally give people. It's not a tax break. It's just like, thanks for having a kid. Here's your money. Just
a one-time check?
I think it's one time. I didn't honestly jot that down, and I should double check it.
Huh. That's
yeah.
All right. I never would have associated most of what you're saying with Poland at all. So this is all.
You get run over so many times. But it's really interesting. They have a really, really popular youth movement with these right-wing these right-wing populist groups. There's a couple of main groups: the National Radical Camp, or the ONR, and the National Movement. And 75% of their members are under 30. And these aren't poor kids that are being indoctrinated with propaganda. These are college-age kids. These are people that are intelligent. But they have this youth fascination. Apparently in the 80s and in the late 80s, early 90s, it was the skinhead thing. The same way that the U.S. dealt with that resurgence of the Aryan nations and your Ruby Ridge with Randy Weaver and people like Timothy McVeigh. We had that resurgence sort of at the same time that the Poles did. They had this fascination with the skinheads. And that abated, and it's moved from the skinheads to being this celebration of this 1930s-esque militarism, where they want to blatantly stand up for what is ethnically Polish, what is traditionally Christian for us, and they're very proud to be aggressively nationalistic. I mean, it's interesting. They have entire very popular clothing lines in Poland that are built around hating the left, like pictures of playing like Space Invaders, where the Space Invaders are Karl Marx's head and you're shooting one and it's exploding. And I think it's not called Hate the Red, but it's something the Red. And it's just this ardently anti-leftist, pro-nationalist, pro-Polish, pro-ethnically Polish, and anti-immigrant fashion line that is hugely popular. But one of the other interesting things, this I guess sort of my closing point in my spiel about Poland and what's going on with their far right, is that the government has just basically thrown their hands up to these right-wing populist groups. The government convenes nationalist rallies. They abolished a state council to combat racism. The Border Patrol is openly anti-Muslim. They'll tweet things. They'll just be like, hey, don't come in here, people that aren't Polish, specifically Muslims. And groups like the National Radical Camp, the ONR, will have just formed paramilitary groups, for lack of a better term, that patrol the streets with the police and protect people from all the Muslims that aren't there. And the police just don't care about it. They're super happy that, like, oh, hey, sweet, someone else is doing our job too. That's awesome. It's a thing I wouldn't have imagined. I guess you just don't think about Poland that much. It doesn't sort of come up in our conversations about what's going on in Europe. It's mostly France and Germany, but I mean, it's like a perfect case study in everything we've been talking about that's been going on with the rise of right-wing populism in Europe.
Well, this sounds a bit more extreme than just some ramblings in France.
Oh yeah, the Geert Wilders just hating people.
Like you could easily just be like, yeah, this is happening in Syria, and I would have believed you. Like, you're talking about militias patrolling streets with with police and Border Patrol tweeting out anti-Islamic messages. Like, that's, I don't know. That's I knew you were doing this little segment. I didn't look into it enough to realize this is what you were going to go for.
Yeah, I mean, I know that one of the things that we Jeff and I want to do is to start doing more blog posts. Since, like he mentioned, he wants to write about Flint. I think I want to write about the right-wing populism in Europe. And I know in a circumstance like this, it's sort of just a list of facts and things that's going on. But I think for my first blog post, I want to sort of look at each of these, elements: the xenophobia, the left-wing economics, the youth-based, the complete lack of care from the government in some circumstances, and sort of compare and contrast these things across country. I mean, it's hard for us to sort of go back and forth and analyze it, but it's such another example of a puzzle piece in the rise of this ideology.
All right. So let's move into the main chunk, which is this week we're doing net neutrality, which Kramer and I have varying opinions on.
Yeah, I might be the most unpopular man on the internet after this. Who knows? Actually, no, that's not true. I'm not a Jeep pie, so I'm fine.
So essentially, the gist of it, if you don't know what's going on, the chairman of the FCC, Ajit Pai, is that how you say his name?
I think.
Okay, good. You didn't correct me. At least we're moving in a direction. He is attempting to change internet, the broadband, from a Title II utility back to what it was before, which I believe was Title I, correct?
Yeah, it was a Title I, where it was considered an information carrier, I think.
Right. So this would basically allow ISPs to have fast and slow lanes, which is what they had before Obama made broadband a Title II in 2015. Netflix, and I don't believe Hulu was paying it at the time, but it's possible because they didn't merge with Time Warner. But they were started as a joint project between some large cable companies, so I don't really know. Essentially, I mean, that's essentially what it do. It doesn't change much else than that. It just basically takes the government out of regulation. I'm on the side of keeping it as a Title II, as a utility, to stop these fast and slow lanes. And I'll let Kramer say his side.
Yeah, so, I mean, my side is, part of me feels like, and it gets thrown around so much, and even I get annoyed hearing it, because I don't like to lump myself in with the anti-net neutrality people. I believe firmly in a free and open internet and all those buzzwords I'm supposed to say to mitigate all the things that I'm about to say to anyone that disagrees with me. I just feel like this might be, again, a solution without a problem. So going into my reasons, I know that the big example that we throw out a lot is Netflix and throttling. I have two problems with that. I guess for the two people, I guess my dad and my uncle being the only people that probably wouldn't know about this, Netflix was being throttled by Verizon, so the service was being slowed down. They wanted them to pay more. I look at this and have a couple problems. One, Netflix has also throttled service from two people that have particular ISPs, independent of the throttling that was being done to them. So Netflix has throttled two people that had AT&T and Verizon. My other problem with the fast and slow lane is, at the time that Netflix was throttled, Netflix was using a third of the bandwidth that I think was it Comcast or Verizon that Verizon had, but they weren't paying for a third. So from my perspective, if I'm Verizon, I can understand that, look, you're not paying for a third of our bandwidth. You're using a third of our bandwidth. You either better pay more to make it worth our while, because we've got other people that are paying whose service is being slowed down because you're using way more than you're paying for, or you're going to get slowed down to justify what you're paying. I know that's a really unpopular opinion. I just personally don't see a problem with it. And I know Jeff and I got into sort of the ethics of potential problems that would come down the road, but your turn to rebut.
Well, I mean, the potential problem is competition. If they can choose based on paid lanes, what moves faster and slower, they can essentially choose who wins and loses in the space of the internet. If you go to a website and it takes 5 minutes to load a page, and you go to another website and it takes 3 seconds, you're going to go back to the one that loads in 3 seconds. The other website's going to die, and they're going to die because they couldn't afford to get in the fast lane. Now, I concede your argument, like, this is a hypothetical, but we're speaking completely in hypotheticals right now. The only thing we have to go on is they were throttling Netflix. Netflix paid to be in the fast lane, and then they stopped throttling it, and then Obama passed this law, so it didn't matter anymore. So all we have is this one example of throttling. And you cite the example of Netflix throttling themselves. I haven't researched that, so I'm just going to take your word on it. I'm not saying you're lying. I just don't know. But
well, most businesses are shady, so.
But yeah, I mean, the stuff against it. I mean, you're good. Like, I don't like having the government in the internet, but when you have these organizations, these ISPs that are not these services are not ethical. They will do anything and everything in their power to make a buck off your information, and they've done it before. So thinking that they won't throttle websites or services that don't want to pay them extra money is, to me, it's a hypothetical, but it's not that far fetched where you couldn't see it happening. Yeah. Now, I mean, you don't like the FCC. I'm not a huge fan of the FCC at all, really. But, I mean, we have this guy, Pai, the chairman, who's a former lawyer for Verizon. So he gets into office, and all of a sudden he wants to change all these net neutrality rules. He's suddenly moving in favor of the ISPs. There's just a lot of fishy stuff going on.
Yeah.
I think we're better off leaving it as utility and leaving it open. Does it suck that these ISPs are having to turn around and put the money on people to pay for the fact that Netflix is using more bandwidth? Sure, internet is expensive, but they've also, since Title II has happened, they've come out with tiered services. All of a sudden, like, they're claiming that there's going to be no innovation. The government's regulating it. Since 2015, I mean, gigabit internet is all over the place because people will pay for it. They have data caps that people are paying for, forced data caps. You can't even get unlimited internet in some places. These ISPs aren't losing any money. Their biggest argument is this is stymieing innovation, and the regulations are causing people to pay more for internet, and these just aren't true.
Yeah, I mean, I'll concede that point 100%. I mean, these people aren't losing money. I mean, even that segment that they did on Last Week Tonight, where the guy from Verizon was talking with the shareholders, he's like, "This isn't gonna cost us any money. It's it's just more regulation." I mean, one of my concerns about the FCC portion of it is sort of what we had touched on last week, is that there's really no oversight with the FCC. And the FCC has a very bad history of being used as a political tool to silence speech. It was done that way with, while they dropped the fair doctrine requirements that they had, I think it was in 83 or 87 under Reagan. I think it was 83. No, 87, whatever. Date's irrelevant. Either way, it was under Reagan. Prior to that, the FCC was used very aggressively as a political tool by people that wanted to launch lawsuits against radio stations or television stations to get views they didn't like dissented. And RFK has come out when he was alive and blatantly said, "Oh yes, we sued people constantly so that we could stop their message from getting out and get ours out more readily." My other problem is, again, with this current administration, with the FCC not having really a lot of oversight, and this cat's just a presidential appointee. I don't like the idea of a presidential appointee, specifically with this administration, and how they like to lie and control the flow of information, having the authority to use the other thing that I don't particularly like in here, the good conduct rule that is issued under Title II. Title II has a good conduct rule that basically says if the FCC deems something that is on, and this was originally done for radio and television, now the internet, or potentially not the internet, depending on if this gets kicked off of Title II, they can limit access to it. They can say, no, you can't see that. And that bothers me. That bothers me a great deal. Aside from that, I mean, I just don't think we did not have a good history of having telephones and TVs as utilities. Prices went up, service went down. Anyway, those are just some of my initial problems with it. I know that you and I both kind of agree that the infrastructure should be public. To me, that just seems obvious.
Oh yeah, prices. You make the infrastructure public. It's, God damn it, I said it wrong twice. Anyway, you make the infrastructure public. Prices will go down. Service will go up, but the ISPs lose money.
Oh yeah, there'll be no interest in that. And I put an article in our.
I mean, they've blocked it. That's what Google Fiber does. They move in and they bring in their infrastructure. The location pays for the majority of it, and that offsets the fees. And Google Fiber offers a better service for relatively cheaper in exchange. But
yeah.
Verizon and Comcast and AT&T and Time Warner have blocked Google as much as humanly possible. I mean, and there's cases where cities have built their own infrastructure and had to fight in the courts for years to get that infrastructure set up against these cable companies. It's difficult. I don't like the FCC, and I do agree, like, that stuff that what you were just saying about them being able to control the information. I get that. It's one of those things, like, there is no perfect
There's no clean answer. Yeah.
There is no, like, oh, well, if he stays Title II, things will be perfect. It's just, that's not the case. We're kind of just, we're in a true, like, case of, like,
damned if you do.
You're picking between, like, the best of two evils, essentially.
Yeah. It's one of the interesting things that I learned when I was researching this, that the physical installation of the infrastructure is almost doubled. The cost of it is almost doubled by the fees that towns charge. There was a really interesting article in Wired, and I printed it off because I'm an old man and I like highlighting things. I'll try to.
You don't have to share everything. You could just say you were reading it.
No, I was just thinking I don't have it on hand, so I can't send it to you. But
we would have got the information anyway, because your service provider would have sold us your browsing information.
Different issue. But one of the things that we're talking about is that how local governments, just small local governments, can be such an inhibition to legitimate competition. They interviewed this cat who had started a small broadband company, and he was doing really well, but it was so expensive. Just the pole fees, the fees to, like, get around poles and crap like that, and what they were charging him to lay his fiber, he's like, it was ridiculous, and it basically bankrupted him.
Right.
And there's a lot of circumstances like that.
But these laws, these ordinance, God damn it!
It's basically kickbacks that you can get from ISPs.
Right, but aren't these set in place from, like, basically they're set up in place. They're lobbied by the ISPs to stop these startup services from happening.
Oh yeah, there's a ton of onerous regulation that the big ISPs love, because it would make their costs go up, but it keeps them in positions
just
of dominance.
To be clear, I hate internet service providers.
Oh, yeah,
I love
too.
the internet, but I absolutely, like, Verizon, Comcast, Time Warner, AT&T, countless others. They're scum. Like,
I have a small local point-to-point connection. They seem nice.
Okay, is it called the U.S. Postal Service? Are you just putting mail in your mailbox and trying to tell me it's internet?
Basically, this was actually recorded 6 months ago, and it's just finally getting out to everyone.
Oh, fuck off. Yeah, we know the future. But yeah, we disagree on this. It's just It's just a plain and simple point.
You know, it's really
He's-
funny how we were talking about your coworker earlier, about how when you when you want to find something that you don't agree with, you have to Google like very specific things. And I was looking up all of this stuff on net neutrality, and going into this conversation, it's one of those things that I don't know a lot about it. I'm not a technology savvy person. I think the internet's a series of tubes. And I was like, how? Like my gut instinct says that I don't like it. So I read some stuff that was pro net neutrality, and I was like, I want to find some stuff that's got some cons. And I kept scrolling through pages and pages of Google, and so I was just eventually Googling very specific things: problem with Title II classification, net neutrality, not National Review.
Yeah, well, that's typically how you find information, Kramer. You Google specifics.
Yeah, but it's but it was just odd how specific it had to be.
Right. I mean, I didn't have any problem finding stuff that was against it. There's plenty against it. And the problem, it's actually harder to find stuff that's for it, not because there isn't.
I had the opposite problem.
Oh, see, I found plenty that was against it. The issue.
Wait, who's your ISP?
Verizon. So at any second, I'm about to be cut off. But it's not so much that I couldn't find articles for it. It's when you actually go to them and you start reading, and you're like, you have no fucking idea what you're talking about. You're just a puff piece. So it was.
Yeah.
I had to like weed through it to actually find something that had something really good to say. I mean, luckily, I have a decent enough grasp where I can just kind of talk about my opinion on it without having to like do too much research. But still, it was kind of disheartening to sit there and go, God damn it, how many HuffPo articles do I have to dig through before I can get to something with some substance?
Crap, I thought the internet was supposed to be smarter than me, and here I am finding people that are not smarter than me.
Goddamn Verizon, choking my data. All right, so let's move away from net neutrality into something else, tech oriented. The cyber attack that happened this week. I believe it was Thursday. I say it like it was forever ago.
Yeah, I think it was Thursday. Yeah,
night or something. So, the hacker collective known as the Shadow Brokers apparently used an exploit that was leaked in April from the NSA for Windows operating systems, essentially forcing out software, ransomware, malware known as WannaCry, which it moves through the internet, corrupting computers and encrypting files, asking for money. In this case, $300 worth of Bitcoin was requested in order for these files to be unlocked. 200,000 computers are estimated worldwide, about 150 countries. I'm just kind of reading facts here very blandly, but UK NHS, FedEx in Europe, Russia Interior Ministry, universities in Asia, so on and so forth were affected. German and Spanish telecommunications were affected. Not as bad, but it's they're still collecting information on how much was actually affected, and there's still more information coming in about like how much was affected. They're expecting the hackers are going to pocket close to $1 billion in Bitcoin before the deadline runs out. I'm assuming that the malware has some kind of clock that tells you have until this time to pay it, or we delete the files. It's typically how it works. But yeah, the Russian Interior Ministry confirmed they had 1,000 computers affected. The most interesting thing I found was you told me part of this, that the virus, the malware, was actually making its way towards American systems, and a cybersecurity researcher that wants to remain nameless, that's just the article I read, he goes by the Twitter handle Malware Tech Blog. He essentially dug into the source code for this virus, found out it had a kill switch set up for an inactive domain name, that essentially the hacker put out the virus, and I'm insinuating, I don't actually know exactly how it works, but put out the virus. He had this kill switch in. When he could activate the domain, the virus had a ping going out. It would pick up that the domain was active, and it would stop it from spreading. This guy found out about it, registered the domain for like $11 and essentially stopped the spread of the virus before it got out of hand. That's the basis of the story. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Kramer.
Yeah, so I mean, just looking through, I mean, we kind of were looking at the same sources, but originally it was thought that an insider at the NSA or the CIA was suspected of leaking these hacking tools, and the hacking has continued even after that guy was arrested. I don't think anybody really knows who's in the group Shadow Brokers. I think they did a big data dump right after the U.S. missile attacks in Syria.
Yeah, that's
but,
part of that data
I think a lot
dump
of folks
was actually this exploit that they used now. Like that was the Windows operating exploit they used to get this virus out there was part of that data dump.
Okay. Yeah, and like everyone else, like anything bad that happens, we're all just assuming it's the Russians because, let's be honest, it probably is.
Maybe. I mean, the Russians got hit with this too, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, malware tech is I'm just referring to the guy who has Twitter handle.
Oh, so this was what the U.S. and the Israelis used against Iran's nuclear program. That's the virus that we used to mess with Iran's nuclear program 7 years ago.
Oh, well, it's good to know it's still operational.
Hey, and they say antiquated technology is not good for anything.
Right?
Look at that. It just
Apparently
crippled almost the entire NHS.
Yeah, it diverted, like 45 hospitals had to divert patients from emergency medical facilities. Also, Theresa May said no medical data was stolen. I don't actually know how the fuck she knows that, but okay.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is just malware tech had a warning. Microsoft pushed out a patch that's not going to fix your computer if it's affected, but it fixes the loophole that they used. And he basically just said like these hacks aren't over. Something like this is going to happen again. The hackers are going to find out how he stopped it. They're going to fix that weakness in it, and they're going to try to push it out again.
Yeah. Oh, also, they did say that the U.S. may get hit because it looked like it hit us. Actually, I think it may have hit Friday because one of the concerns about the U.S. is that we, when everybody goes back to work on Monday and starts opening up the computers and stuff like that, it may hit then. That's what I read in the Times.
Yeah, I did. I saw something about that. It's possible.
Yeah. I hope not.
Well.
Be a real unfortunate way to start a Monday. First of all, it's Monday.
It's
the armpit of the week.
I don't know. It might be. It just depends. Depends on what level you are in in your company. Me, I go in, the computer doesn't work. Well, fuck. I guess I'm just gonna not use this computer today. The manager goes in. Maybe there's a bigger issue for him. Or they shut down all the hospitals and everybody's in trouble.
Yeah. Oh, also, so apparently $300 is worth 0.17 Bitcoin, and if they got $1 billion, they got about 562,000, a little over Bitcoin. So look at the current exchange rate.
It's what is Bitcoin?
One Bitcoin is $1,778.20 right now.
You should have let me guess. Solid. Damn it! I was gonna say $1,700.
Look at you.
Listen,
fancy.
And I say guess. I actually just know generally what Bitcoin's worth because I kick myself every day for not investing in that.
I know. I was having a conversation with someone about Bitcoin the other day, and there was like some cat in like 2003 or something, like mined like 2 or 3 or 5 Bitcoin, just like forgot about it until like 2009, and he was like, "Oh crap, I have so much money now."
Yeah, I remember being in college and trying to
explain Bitcoin.
Well, that plus just trying to figure out how I could set up a mining operation to do it. It's pretty impossible, especially in a college apartment. But yeah, you can make some money. It's depressing. So let's move on to something else. James Comey was fired Tuesday. If you hadn't heard about this, I don't know where the fuck you are, but this is big news. I mean, Trump fired him after the he's come out and said that the recommendation didn't matter, but he fired him under the recommendation of Kushner, Sessions, and somebody else, the assistant.
Rod Rosenstein.
Yeah.
Can we just before we get too far into it, there's been like 2 or 3 different versions of why he fired him. 2 or 3 different versions of whether or not he did it based off of Rosenstein. Rosenstein has like come out and protested. I mean, it's
there's also
laughable.
There's also the thing about, like, they don't mention it, but the fact that, like, Roger Stone might have had some input on him being fired.
True. I think Roger Stone thinks Roger Stone had input on him being fired.
Roger Stone is the Florida man. He's just down there running around, running his mouth. Netflix gave him like a little documentary, so now he thinks he's a fucking amazing. Like, Netflix has him, so it's perfect. But yeah, he's a fucking.
Yeah, but apparently, so from my understanding of it, Trump asks Rod Rosenstein, like, "Hey, can you put your thoughts to paper on how you think Comey handled the Hillary emails?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, no problem. You know, I don't know if this is going to be used for a political purpose, but yeah, no problem." So he does that, and then they use that as the basis for firing Comey. And Rosenstein's like, "Oh, I said he handled it poorly, and I said that we should make sure the FBI director doesn't do this again, but I never said he should be fired." And he was like, if you keep sending people out into the media to say it was my decisions, like, I'm resigning, which he eventually decided not to do. And so the White House was like, "Oh no, it was all Rod Rosenstein." And then that happened, and they're like, "It was never Rod Rosenstein. We were going to do it anyway." And then he was fired for the mishandling of the Hillary emails. But actually, no, it's just sort of a whole, we don't like him as a person.
Yeah, well, we have Trump himself doing an interview on NBC with Lester Holt this week. Yeah, had to be.
Oh yeah.
Calls Comey a grandstander and a showboater, and says himself, you can watch this online, says he would have fired him even without a recommendation from any of his staff. So
it flies so much in the face.
Which has probably led to why Rosenstein didn't put in his resignation.
But it flies so much in the face of so many other things, because some White House aides have said, "Oh no, they've been looking for a reason to fire him since the beginning," and others are saying, "Oh no, it's ever since his last Senate testimony, and he's a showboat and he's out there on TV too much," which is actually interesting. I saw there was a write-up in either the Washington Post or the New York Times by a friend of James Comey, and he said, he was like, "Full disclosure, I'm a friend. James Comey's a good man." And he talked about why James Comey was on TV so much, and he said James Comey wants to take the heat. He wants to be the person to go out there, take the heat for everybody, so no one else has to do it. Which, take it for what you will. It's an interesting take on it. But yeah, they say they've been trying to fire him for months. Oh no, it's only been a week. Oh, it's been since the last Senate testimony. It's ridiculous. How many different versions of the story can the White House make up?
Do you actually believe? What? No, let me word this better. Do you think Comey should have been fired? Maybe not now, but do you think he was deserving of being fired?
If this is just based off the handling of the Hillary emails, no. I think he, I guess, should have been counseled in the same way that Kellyanne Conway was counseled. I think the AG or the. You mean she was counseled because she said something stupid. Yeah, she does kind of have this crypt keeper thing going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that he, like, the AG, the deputy AG, somebody should have gone like, "Look, handle this stuff better." Even though he did something that had a partisan output, had a partisan result that Trump and Sessions and Huckabee Sanders praised. And it's so funny also going back and listening to Huckabee Sanders saying, "Well, Hillary Clinton, if you're attacking the head of the FBI, then you know you're guilty." And then she's out defending Donald Trump attacking the head of the FBI because he's not guilty of anything. Right. Yeah, I don't think he should have been fired for that.
Right. So I asked that question essentially because Politico did a poll. It essentially, the recipients, 29% of the recipients approved of the respondents is the word I was actually trying to use. 29% approved of the firing, 38% didn't, and 32% said they don't know enough. So 10 people agree.
I applaud those group of people that said they didn't know enough. That's what I should have said.
Yeah, and then 46% agree that Trump fired him to slow the investigation against him, which I don't know that I agree with. Not because I don't think Trump would do that, but that I think he's got enough advisors to tell him, like, even if you fire this man, it's not going to stop the investigation because he isn't the FBI. I mean, he's just the head.
Yeah, I mean,
now, interesting enough, I did just get a tweet. It's not new, but Lindsey Graham came out saying that Senator Cornyn, is that how you say his name? Cornyn? You know what I'm talking about? It's
I'll take a look at it real quick.
John Cornyn, Cornyn.
Oh yeah, Cornyn.
They're considering him. Trump's considering him for the next director. Lindsey Graham said that the next director should come from within the FBI, not from the Senate, I guess.
Yeah, I know that he had a short list of 7, and it included Giuliani and Christie.
I did hear
Andrew,
Giuliani. Like,
yeah.
What the fuck? Are you kidding me? Wasn't
Yeah.
Giuliani the mayor of New York during like some of the worst issues with the police department? Like essentially in the history of.
Yeah, I think he basically made being homeless illegal and kicked out all the hobos. But he also considered Trey Gowdy, and there was a video floating around on YouTube that was popular amongst conservative circles. He's the guy that was questioning, I think it was somebody from the FBI, asking them about being kind of like no fly, no buy. When you're on the terrorist watch list, if you can't fly, you can't buy a firearm. And he was like, name me one other constitutional right that you have to petition to get back from the government. And it was this big whole Second Amendment thing. But yeah, he was also on the Benghazi. He was also on the Benghazi panel, and was pretty critical of that. But Andrew McCabe was up, and yeah, I didn't know too many of the other names.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. So the 46% that said he did it to slow the investigation, like I said, I don't necessarily believe that's why he did it. He's not helping himself though by coming out and saying. And he said this in third person, that the Trump and Russia stuff is made up and Comey needed to go because of it. He said that, yeah. I believe that was part of the NBC interview, but I'm not exactly sure. The letter that he sent out where he claimed, thank you for telling me on 3 separate occasions I wasn't under investigation. Like, who writes a letter like that? That letter was weird.
It's like a kid trying to do reverse psychology for the first time to like get the mom to give him a cookie or something. Thanks for telling me I could have a cookie earlier, Mom, and hoping they'll forget that they told their child they couldn't have a cookie.
And then the biggest thing is the stuff coming out about God damn it. I need to go sleep. Was basically like the dinner with Comey and January, I believe, where he
pledged loyalty.
Yeah, wanted to pledge loyalty, and then tweeting about potential tapes and then trying to like go back on it like when nobody saw the tweet. I can't talk on it even though I already kind of did.
My day's going nothing's okay. What's the matter? I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, this kind of
like
goes
he's
into
trying
the last part, but I mean, yeah, the stuff they were talking, I mean, I found stuff too about like previous employees coming out and talking about the fact that he would record calls in Trump Tower when he was in his office, like doing business calls, which is fine. In the state of New York, you're allowed to do that as long as one of the parties knows. One side of the conversation has to know it's being recorded. But
yeah,
can't do that anymore in the White House. Also, and just to clarify, like these recordings were used in lawsuits at various points, so they exist. Essentially what I'm saying. So these employees
it's like he's trying to
about it.
It's like he's trying to get every comparison possible to Richard Nixon. And I know Peter Schiff came out.
Bring that up.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Schiff came out and he was like, "Hey, let's see these tapes." And didn't the ACLU request to see them too?
Yeah, I have that down in the list this week in Trump, which we could probably.
It's all kind of bleeding together.
Yeah, we can kind of move into the first one in this week in Trump is.
We forgot Yates.
Oh yeah, go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, so just some of the fun stuff that happened during Sally Yates' testimony. I mean, she had she had testimony that was, I guess, marquee level exciting. And Comey also said that he would testify, but he would only do it in a public hearing. He was offered to testify behind closed doors, and he said no, he'd only do it in public. So that's interesting. Yeah, but during the Yates testimony, some interesting stuff came up. Basically, her timeline was Russia knew that Michael Flynn had lied about his contacts. Then Yates went and told White House counsel, and a couple days later they fired her. During the course of her testimony, I swear to God, the Republicans only asked about the enforcement of the travel ban, how all the information got leaked about the travel ban and about Michael Flynn and about Russia, and they asked about Hillary's emails. And Ted Cruz and Yates had this fun little exchange where Ted Cruz thinks he's going to get one over on her, and he asks her, "Ma'am, can you name me a circumstance in history when the acting attorney general did not or refused to enforce an executive order from the executive branch?" And she said, "No, Senator Cruz, I can't, but I also can't name you any time in history when the attorney general didn't know about an executive order until after it had been passed into law." And then he kind of slunk away. Interesting. Right. Clapper said some interesting stuff. The thing that stuck out to me the most was that he said, Representative Ben Sass, was concerned about First Amendment issues and journalists having, if they get leaks, having the right to publish them and not being held liable for prosecution. So, Glenn Greenwald with Ed Snowden. And James Clapper came out and said that journalists, in his opinion, should be prosecuted if they hurt America. I think I didn't hear too much about that in any other outlets, but I mean, it is an interesting statement. And then Trump went on to blame Barack Obama for hiring Flynn, said that Flynn should have never gotten a security clearance, even though Flynn went through a reevaluation for security clearance in January by the Trump administration. And the fact that the President Trump thinks that the president approves all security clearances personally, I find to be very strange. But Flynn got some subpoenas for some of his associates. They're subpoenaing Flynn associates. And he had a lot of his business records from the time that he was fired from the DIA from 2014 to present subpoenaed as well. And I assume that's in connection to his payments received from Russia, Russia Today, and Turkey, and his lack of registration as a foreign agent until March of this year. So interesting stuff came of the Yates testimony. I look forward to the sequel, the Comey testimony, as well.
Well, let's just move into this week in Trump. Since we've already kind of used a lot of the stuff, but I mean, the first thing we have is, I mean, after he fired Comey, he had this tweet that he hasn't really redacted, kind of just stepped back from. He can't speak on it, but he essentially tweeted out saying, Comey better hope there's no tapes of their dinner before he starts leaking information to the media, I suppose. Basically saying that there's tapes, he recorded conversations, and then realizing, oh shit, you can't actually do that. He kind of tried to back up. Sean Spicer said in response, when questioned on this, he had no comment. When asked if it was a threat, he said it's not a threat. It's just stating a fact.
He's really hoping there aren't, because he'll look really bad too, obviously.
Yeah, I don't really understand.
I personally, I feel like Sean Spicer's got to get some type of award. Whatever award they gave Mother Teresa, he needs that, because that man has to just wake up every morning. It's like that Saturday Night Live skit where they had Kellyanne Conway like running back and forth between trying to have a day off and dealing with all the Trump's weird stuff. Like Sean Spicer, just every day you have to hide in the bushes from press and try to rationalize the things this man has said.
Well, we can take it right into
Saint Spicer.
We can take it right into, I mean, yeah. So like I said earlier, like we have the former employees coming out and saying he's recording it. But speaking of Sean Spicer, who should get an award for this, I mean, Trump's talking about canceling White House briefings and just because citing the struggle for his staff to speak with perfect accuracy. He wants to move to written releases only. I'm assuming because Spicer is threatening some kind of suicidal action. He looks like he's just pale skin on like hanging off bone at this point. He's just.
I know his bloodshot eyes at all moments looks like he doesn't sleep. That poor man. Give that man an Ambien and just like a 3 days off.
I'm just trying to like scroll through all this stuff. We were talking about Flynn taking money from Russia Today, all that stuff. We have I think it was Thursday, came out that from a personal letter from Trump's tax councils revealing he's collected at least $100 million from Russian people or organizations up until March of this year. Rod Rosenstein is going to brief the full Senate on this next week, so I'm assuming we'll have some kind of update on this next Sunday. But he was collecting money from organizations in Russia up until March, so 2 months ago, month and a half ago.
Huh.
But yeah.
But it's okay. I've divested myself of any involvement in that business, so don't worry about it. As have my family members that are all paid staffers.
Now we have next Thursday, White House announced the Election Integrity Commission headed by Mike Pence and Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach. Essentially the commission will study the registration and voting processes used in federal elections and research fraudulent registrations in voting. This is just going with Trump's allegations of millions of fraudulent votes that were cast for the other side. Now, the ACLU has filed a Freedom of Information Act for evidence of this claim.
Yeah.
So
that commission is going to find evidence of voter fraud in traditionally Democratic districts that are minority heavy. I guarantee it.
Yeah, it's right. That's what the ACLU is claiming. That's why they're trying to basically make it. He needs to present some kind of evidence because you can't just run around and keep claiming these wild things without presenting any evidence whatsoever. And he does it for everything.
Well, you know what? The flat earthers and the young earth creationists have gotten away with it for a long time, so don't count them out.
I wouldn't say they got
I think
away
the
with
Guardian.
They're just not the president,
Guardian,
so they can do what they want.
Yeah. I think the Guardian had a write-up, maybe it was the LA Times. Can't recall off the top of my head. Those are two very different things on different continents, but they had one of them had a write-up on the number of black voters that had a hard time voting in, I think it was Michigan, one of the states. So a state somewhere in the United States, from some news outlet, indicated there was something like 200,000 people had either a hard time registering to vote or just weren't even able to vote during the presidential election because of voter ID laws that had been put in place previously that were controversial or that were already in place. So,
right.
An interesting tie-in.
Let's see. I have two more on this list. I'm trying to decide which one's the better one. Let's go with Tom Price. We already talked about him earlier. He was in West Virginia this week with Kellyanne Conway to discuss the opioid epidemic that's troubling the state. This is where Dan Hyman was arrested. But in these talks, he spoke against medication-based therapies, basically that are there to aid in people like weaning patients off of these drugs, and instead pushed faith-based programs, stating that if we're just substituting one opioid for another, we're not moving the dial much. Folks need to be cured so they can be productive members of society and realize their dreams. Essentially stating that medication doesn't work and you should pray to get off your drug addiction.
Yeah, this literally reminds me of Scientology has a detox center. They have a bunch of detox centers, and that's a thing that they use. Like, you don't need to wean yourself off. You don't need drugs to do it. You need to exercise and eat a low-fat diet and sweat a bunch, and you sweat out the toxins. It's the term prosperity theology has come up a lot, and it came up when you and I were talking about this Tom Price thing, and it's so funny because a week ago I was reading an article in the Atlantic about prosperity theology and how Trump adheres to this, and it's your Joel Osteen's, if God loves you he'll give you money, and if you aren't in God's favor then he kills your parents and makes you Batman or something.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I know. The Lord works in mysterious ways. But I have seen prosperity theology prop up so many times since I read that article. I saw it and I was like, that seems like a bit of a stretch. I mean, maybe Trump does believe in prosperity theology. I mean, I grew up around a lot of it, so it's not like so far out of the woodwork for me. But it's funny, all these people who have never heard of it, they've never encountered it, and now after that one article I read, it just popped up everywhere, and I'm seeing it in comments on Reddit, like, no, he's 100% into prosperity theology. I know this. And I'm like, I didn't see a word about this until a week ago, and now everyone's talking about prosperity theology like they've been studying it for years.
Listen,
Anyway,
know,
sorry, I had a little thing there.
I don't know about all that. All I know is this is the Secretary of Health and Human Services that is out there promoting prayer for illnesses and ailments.
That is some Christian Science stuff right there.
What the fuck? Him and Bill Nye need to have an argument so I can just we just get it on YouTube and just watch them argue nonsense. Yeah, that would be perfect. We could have Bill Nye on one side arguing that gender is a fluid whatever, and we can have him on the other side screaming about you can pray yourself out of not being gay, and we just watch them spew nonsense at each other.
I watched two of my buddies told me about the the Bill Nye gender thing that he did on one of the episodes, and I was like, you're overreacting, calm down. And I pulled it up and I watched it and I was like, this is an abomination. This is disgusting. I'm a huge supporter of LGBT issues, but I'm like, you are not doing anybody any favors. I don't know if this is like Eric Andre sort of anti-humor that you're getting at. It's so bad it's actually almost funny, cringe humor. But if it's not, then please just say it is.
I don't understand political correctness to the point that you're just going to rewrite science.
No, yeah.
Gender's not... you can choose to be male or female, but gender's not... It's not... What he's basically saying is, you can... It doesn't matter what... you... Essentially, you're born as an amoeba, and you just decide on what you want to be. That's what I
don't remember choosing to be a man in the fetus. I'm sorry, in the womb, but...
it's not insensitive to say, no, you were born a man, you chose to then move to female. It's just...
Yeah, it's like... It's like something I saw on Tumblr. Somebody was filling out a medical record thing, and they were like, they only have two genders. And someone said, it's because you're at a hospital. Hospitals aren't politically correct. Hospitals need to know your biological sex because you have greater predispositions for different diseases. Fill the thing out properly. This has nothing to do with your identity. This has nothing to do with appropriate terms to use. This has everything to do with, if you're a man, you're predisposed to certain diseases. If you're a woman, you're predisposed to others. You can get angry about the form later.
Well, there's also hormones and biological factors that have to be assessed, and they can't assess it if they don't know your sex. It's all absurd, and one day we're gonna get into the discussion of the absurdity that's going on up in Canada right now. But next we're going to move to the absurd statements of Jeff Sessions this week, who orders the return of tough drug policies and mandatory minimum sentences. He sent out asking for police forces to charge the most serious and readily provable crimes, no matter what it is, essentially restarting mandatory minimum sentences. That's going to do nothing but increase incarceration rates in the United States, which is already higher than every other country in the world by a pretty good margin.
Yeah, all it's going to do is increase incarceration rates, probably further embolden people in the drug trade to stay in the drug trade. It's going to piss off a lot of people because with a lot of mandatory minimums, they do a ton of civil asset forfeiture when they do that. So people get a lot of their stuff taken, which can put innocent people out on the streets that didn't know anything about this. The Rand Corporation did a great study, and I think it was the late 90s, early 2000s, about mandatory minimums. Iran Corporation is a very well-respected corporation. Francis Fukuyama worked with them. They do great studies. They're very full of it, very intelligent people. And basically their conclusion about mandatory minimums is that these are useless. They're a lovely political tool. Thanks, Bill Clinton, darling of the Democratic Party that everyone loves to love. These are useless. They're counterproductive. They make things worse. You have no leeway of any variety when you're enforcing mandatory minimums. Oh, small amount of pot versus 14 pounds of cocaine? Cool. Sorry, third strike. Both of you are in jail for life. Go.
Right. I mean, it's nothing. I mean, Sessions is a massive supporter of the private prison system. Like, there's 2 or 3 of his previous aides are now lobbyists for the private prison, like, infrastructure. It's, I don't know. Like, Huffington Post wrote a article that is ridiculous, but they call him an ignorant monster, and it was pretty fun to read. But
I could just imagine someone in one of those Women's Day marches hats, just screaming, "You're a monster!" And it's not that I don't support the Women's March. No, I 100% support that. It's just like the type of person that would wear one would probably do the other.
Listen, why do you hate women in neutral, free, open internet? I don't understand what's going on with you. You're just not the person I started this podcast with. But yeah, Jeff Sessions is a piece of shit, and the drug war helps nobody. So
it was actually really perfect because your mic went out right when you cussed, and it sounded like we edited it.
Damn it! I said shit. I said piece of shit. Just so you know. But yeah, that's all we have for this week. I think that's a perfect note to end on. That. So you can remember that for a week, that the drug war sucks and Jeff Sessions is a piece of shit. Just make sure everybody heard that.
All right, then. I'm happy with that. That was tip top.
Right. So our website, it's armchairconstituents.com, is now up and running. We're going to get blogs up there soon, but you can listen to all the episodes. This episode will be on there probably by the time you're listening to it, but we still have SoundCloud up. We'll have the newest episode on it. Stitcher, Google Play Music, iTunes, everything's there. You can follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. We're everywhere. Please subscribe, like, retweet, all the good things. Trying to grow this thing, so any little
build a media empire over here.
All right, calm down.
Armchair Constituents News Network.
All right. Well, until next week. We will.
Bye.